Top Lobster Productions.
We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely enormous.
Oh yeah, dude. There's some Nephilim shit.
It's like we all know what's going down, but no one's saying shit what happened to the home of the brave. These motherfuckers, they controlling us now, and no one's talking about how they made us fight and be slaves. And everybody's just walking around, head in the clouds, and won't awaken to a dead in the grave. By then it's too late, we need to be ready to raise up. Welcome to the end of days.
Everybody is slaves, only some are aware that the government releasing poison in the air.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Nephilim Death Squad. I am David Lee Corbo, a.k.a. The Raven. That is Top Lobster, the father of disinformation. Before we introduce today's guest, I would like to remind all of our live viewers that this is a 30-minute preview only. Sometime around the 30-minute mark, we'll be going live exclusively to patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad, where you can continue enjoying an ad-free viewing experience, tagging in the chat, and also gaining access to the episode before the general public does, and you can do it all for free. That's right, guys. Sign up for a 7-day free trial. Try to absorb as much content as you can, and then kick rocks before the billing cycle kicks in, but I bet you can't do it because we have a lot of backlog content. So if you're looking for more NDS, patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad is the place for you. All right, guys, we are officially welcoming back Donnie Darkened. It has been quite a while since we talked to Donnie, but a lot of what we talked about in these previous episodes.
I just realized I misspelled his name, Donnie Darkened. I wrote again. It's just like a one of these forced.
No,
I'm so sorry. Here we
No,
go.
you're
We're
good.
gonna
You're
show.
good.
We'll show you stuff.
Dead naming him.
Yeah, I'm dead naming Donnie. Very sorry, Donnie.
It's
I did
okay.
not mean that.
But welcome back, Donnie. Let everybody know before we get into this conversation where they can find your work, because you do quite a bit of work and there's a lot of fascinating information that you've put out there. Where can people find it?
Quite a bit of work. I feel like I have so much work I still need to do. Like I feel like I'm not doing enough work. But you can find me on x.com at Donnie. It's at Donnie Darkened, but it's Donnie Darkened. And you can go to my highlights and you can just see so much information. There's probably like hours of stuff. Just go to my highlights and just start reading, because that's like all the important stuff. I think if you just read my highlights, everything will make sense about what's really unfolding that virtually nobody seems to be talking about, and no one has really offered me a good challenge, to what I'm saying specifically about the unfolding deception that I believe is playing out right now. But yeah, that's where you can find me. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something useful for you here is maybe take your highlights, all of this stuff, put it into a Word file, feed it through AI, and see what you can get. See what you can cram it down into. Maybe it could give your page a little, a nice little summary and get people in to see what you're.
He does a great job of actually using like what you're supposed to use the highlights for. All I do is like algo boosting, where like I'll say something that is not of value to anyone, and then I'll retweet my own thing, and then I'll highlight it so that it kind of boosts the algorithm. And there's a way but if you go to my highlights, then it's literally like all I've highlighted is just the insane ramblings of a partially schizophrenic man on X. So not very useful, unlike yours, which you've actually used the function to catalog your work, which I'm a big fan of. So yeah, you click on that little highlights button and you get all those different breakdowns. That's a good way of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I've been using it, just because like there's just a lot of information, and I think the highlights is really cool. I don't think enough people know about highlights though, but yeah, it's a huge one.
I honestly think, and we'll get off this in a second, but X, it's a great platform for what it is. It's my favorite platform because I think it is the closest to culture, probably because Elon's manufacturing culture. But there's a lot of like, sort of apparatus that's missing from the app. I would love to see like a catalog for live. I mean, not for live, for video content. We can't even host our stuff there because he doesn't have a system for that. But speaking of X, Donnie, we were talking behind the scenes before we started the show, And I don't know, I mean, we don't have to stay here, but I think it's a good launching pad for the conversation. And that is that the last time we spoke, we spoke quite a bit about this this JQ, right? This idea that suddenly there's an explosion of expert level Jew noticers, and these people are doing a fair bit of blaming the Jews for every single thing that ails them. And since we've talked last time, that narrative has exploded in a massive way. And maybe we could start with this. It's something that I've been talking about, and you might find it kind of fun. Um, on January 20th, we had reached such a critical mass in the narrative of Jew noticing that I said, if this is in fact manufactured, we might expect to see a big creator, a big influencer come out and push it a little bit further over the edge, right? Where it's like the average people on X will take the conversation so far, and then somebody influential will come and kick the ball even further down the field. And so what I said was, it is time for Kanye West to reemerge. That's the exact tweet that I put out there on January 20th. And then lo and behold, just before the Super Bowl happens, Kanye West, takes Twitter by storm, takes X by storm once again, and starts just spewing all kinds of insane, unhinged tweets. But among those insane, unhinged tweets, which, honestly are a lot of fun to me, he starts to really hammer the Jew thing. And this all comes to a head when he takes out ad space on the Super Bowl, promotes his website, and then removes all other merchandise off of his website except for a t-shirt with a on it. And so, man, I mean, it's hard for me to look at that any other way except for I was able to call that move because this is manufactured. Do you have any thoughts on that, Donnie?
Yeah, I would say that your intuition was spot on. I think that this stuff like this can be misinterpreted even by a lot of people that follow my work. And a lot of people, when they say it's manufactured, they mean in like it's a man manufactured thing. That it's that really it's the cabal manufacturing this. And again, this is the thing that I've been saying a lot recently about the truther movement, right? Which is fundamentally a new age movement. It always has been. Is that they miss the bigger picture because they always trace everything back to some man, some group, some secret society, but they're not thinking about how God is actually the one who's sovereign, how he's the one who uses the hearts of human leaders, both righteous and wicked, to accomplish his overarching purposes, right? And this is the reason why, the New Age truther movement, they believe they're fighting an evil force that's hiding secret knowledge from us and using the ignorance of humanity to enslave us, right? That's the truther narrative. And the more down the rabbit hole you go, right, you take the red pill, and the more down the rabbit hole you go, you start to learn what this knowledge or what this gnosis is. And that's what Gnosticism is. It's the revealing of the hidden knowledge that's been suppressed by these dark forces in their view, right? Which they equate to as the God of the Bible, as Yahweh, and the Jews, right? His chosen people. That's why they say the Jews, their God is, and the same way the Gnostics say that Yahweh is Satan. And this whole New Age truther deception is Satan gathering the nations, preparing them for Armageddon, where they will fight against Yahweh, right? Which will be, Christ returning to establish his reign. And the world will see it as, the culmination of this new world order. And that's exactly why the New Age, like Alice Bailey in her book Raise and Initiation, says that every evil of the world can be traced back to the lying machinations of the Zionists, right? And where did Alice Bailey get all of her teachings from? From an quote unquote ascended master named Dwal Kul. And if you look at a picture of him, he's like a Tibetan.
How would you even begin to spell that? Dwal, D-W?
It's D-W-A-A-L or K-H-U-U-L. pretty sure.
WAA.
Yeah, Dwal Cool. Why don't you pull up a picture of Dwal Cool where this stuff
Yeah, I
comes
got to
from?
see the picture now. What was that last name? Cool. How would you spell that?
Khuul. I'm like 95% sure that's how you spell it.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm already getting pictures of is this
Descended Master
Blavatsky's face associated with this, and
Mhm.
yeah, okay, I'm getting images of him now. Top, do you want me to pull this up real quick? Yeah, okay, boom, there you go. He's very much
Yes.
like an ascended Buddhist monk master kind of
Yes.
visage. Yeah, okay.
Tibet is where a lot of this stuff comes from, and it's no coincidence that led several expeditions to Tibet. Why? To discover the lost secrets of the ancient civilization of Shambhala, where the Aryan race had divine authority, and it's a counterfeit of God's kingdom. And that's exactly why the talked about the 1,000-year Reich, because it's a counterfeit of Christ's 1,000-year Reich. And that's also exactly why, and his associates, were working behind the scenes to subvert Christianity and with positive Christianity, which seek to de-Judaize the faith, removing its Jewish roots in favor of that ancient Aryan externalization of the hierarchy, New Age spirit, which is pagan, right? It's a neo-Aryan pagan occult religion, right? And that's exactly why pull up real quick in Tibet.
In Tibet. Let me see what we
Yes.
can do here. This is fascinating too because
in Paris, here we go.
In Paris,
Kanye should remix that.
We've been talking about it a lot. How Alice Bailey, along with the works of Blavatsky, determined that 2025 was going to be the end of this like golden age, right? That was the expression that they used, even the golden age. And I believe they thought it was like the age of Aquarius, but it's just fascinating that Donald Trump is using that language right now.
They're saying they tried to trace that race myth back to in Tibet, so they believe that it came from Tibet. Okay.
Yes.
Top, I was really confused because you made me type in Paris, and I'm like, yeah, I can see.
They were there too.
In Tibet, there we go. In Tibet, okay.
Yes. And Tibet is where a lot of these mystery schools come from, right? And the idea here is that the Aryan myth that BBC talks about. It's really a Gnostic occult New Age thing where they believe that the Aryan race was on the top of the hierarchy over the spiritual dimension in the same way that Yahweh chose the Jews to reveal himself, right? Well, in this way, the pagan, the occult gods, right? The gods of the nations, pass this information to the Aryan race, and that's ultimately what the sought in Tibet was to confirm all this. If you look at Himmler, all the stuff he believed, and you have a lot of people saying, well, we're Christian. It's like, no, they weren't really Christian. They were using Christianity as a facade, as a veneer, in order to push their agenda and gain power, right? And we see the same thing happening today.
On that topic,
just to clarify, because this episode started again with us having another contention about Jews or Israel on Twitter, and then you're like, we should talk about it, and I was like, all right, let's talk. So then we DM'd, but just recently I was on Stu Peters' show, and I guess you know who he is.
Yes.
And towards the end of that, I gave him very hard pushback on, because it was like, I agree with a lot of the stuff that he's saying about what the current Jews are doing now. Not good. If you look at what some of them are doing now and you say, hey, this is cool, I don't really know what to tell you, dude. Not cool. It's some of it's borderline
evil. Yes.
Yeah. But then he's like, and that's why it was cool. And I was like, actually, no. And then
such a jump, such a leap.
Yeah, I was like, we went down this exact path, and I was like, he was an occultist. He was tied into a bunch of different things. Why was he giving speeches from the Pergamon, the seat of Satan? Well, the interview ended shortly after that. Like, he didn't want to really talk about that. And I was like, that's fine, but like, you need to do a little bit more research into what he was doing, because and don't get me wrong, maybe back then in Weimar Germany, the Jews were doing the same thing that they were doing in America. Or maybe they were the face of it, at least, and it was corrupting their society. So there is reason for the rise of, but it doesn't mean that this guy was correct. It doesn't mean that
Or-
he was
or
actually
that he
doing
was
the right
Christian.
thing.
Or
Yeah.
more importantly, that he was from the Spirit of God. And I think that's
Correct.
the big thing. And here's the thing: do I believe God was using? Absolutely. God absolutely used for what? It was another culmination of the cycle of judgment on the tribes of Judah and Israel. And that's exactly what we see throughout history, them being disobedient, them rebelling, God using the wicked nations to discipline and punish them, to ultimately restore them. And right now, we are in the time of the Gentiles, where the gospel is going out to the Gentiles. And when that reaches its full, like Romans 11 says, then we will see the final judgment, this final cycle of judgment and restoration. And I absolutely believe that God used in his wickedness to to regather the nation, the national Israel, not in righteousness, but still in rebellion, still in apostasy. That's why it's the harlot, because
I don't think that these are the same people. This is the problem here. That
and I want to get into this too. I want to get into the Khazarian theory as well.
it's not necessarily Khazarian. I just don't think that, even when we're talking about Judaism being the foundation of Christianity, I disagree with you wholeheartedly, depending on your definition of what Judaism is. Because what these people practice in Israel, the ones that aren't atheist sodomites, what they're practicing is a new form of Judaism. It's like a rabbinic Judaism that was created 500 to 200 years after the death of Christ. So this is a response to Christianity. So when Ben Shapiro walks around with his little hat talking about Judeo-Christian values, absolutely not. That's why I'm very hard against this. Like, get out of here with that. That's complete nonsense. This was a refutation of what Christ did. Now, if we're talking about the original Judaism, where we're talking about the Torah and the people that follow that, the descendants of Abraham and Moses, that's way different. Whatever Jesus was talking, they called him rabbi. That means teacher. But he certainly wasn't a rabbi in whatever temple these people were talking about. Now,
here's a good question for you.
Yes.
I have a really good question for you. In the Old Testament, when the Jews worshipped Baal, were they no longer would you say the same thing applies then than now?
When they what would be the same thing? What I say?
In
The
the
same
sense
thing?
that their practices are not in alignment, and
when they were worshiping Baal in the Old Testament, did God abandon them?
My question is, are these even the same people? I don't know.
Are you, now here's the question. Now let's be specific. Do you mean genetically, or do you mean like religiously?
Well, that's my question.
Well, religiously,
yes,
they are in rebellion, just like they were in the Old Testament, right? It's nothing. There's nothing new under the sun, and this is the big thing, and this is why I think a lot of truthers really miss the bigger picture here. Is that, like Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 9 says, there is nothing new under the sun. What has happened will happen again. What has been done will be done again, and we are witnessing cyclical events. What's happening now is no different than what happened in the Old Testament, where they rebelled against God, they worshipped foreign gods, they twisted his teachings, and what happened? Discipline, purification, and redemption. And then what happened again? Disobedience, rebellion, apostasy, worshiping foreign gods. What happened next? Discipline, purification, redemption. What happened next? And this is exact, and it's all foreshadowing the ultimate culmination of these things in the last days. And if you say, well, this actually isn't happening. What we're seeing now is something totally new. It's not that there's, this is a new thing under the sun. This is something that is never happened before. That's where it's like, well, hold on a second, and this is why I say it takes a biblical worldview to understand it, right? Because someone like David Icke, right? He says the same exact thing. These aren't Jews. These are, they're actually, well, he says that they're reptilians, and that, they're archons, and that Yahweh is the top archon. But this is exactly the deception, right? Is that
can I interject, Donnie? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I have something in my mind right now. So when the Bible in Revelation 3:9, which has become very contentious, right? And so my main highlight here is that the Bible is seeking to differentiate between the Jews and then people that are claiming to be Jews but are really of the synagogue of.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
listen, if you know the power of this lineage, and even if you're from it partially, wouldn't you be just tripping all over yourself to claim it? And what it looks like to me, the last, I don't know, 100 years of foreign policy that we've been, at least 80 years of foreign policy that we've been privy to, it looks like it looks like a manufacturing of end times prophecy. Everything that we've been going through, like giving them the state of Israel, going through this entire cleansing.
But isn't that exactly what David? But isn't that exactly what Gnostic antichrists like David Icke say?
So what?
You-
Isn't that what's
But
happening?
why? But why? The question is why? Why are Christians saying the same thing that people who believe the God of the Bible is the enemy of mankind? Why? Because the New Age wants you to believe that what's happening is a manufactured set of prophecies that are man-made, and the people, the cabal that are manufacturing these things, are taking instruction from an evil, false God, the God of Israel, and that what's happening isn't actually biblical prophecy, right? But rather that the Bible is merely the script in which these evil archons are using to enslave humanity.
Here's
And
the
that's
thing,
why
though.
I say
The God of Israel again. So let's get into definitions. What is the God of current?
Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is
I
Yahweh.
disagree with you, but right now, like I understand the definition, the biblical definition of what you're saying.
Wait,
but right now,
question.
that doesn't seem to be the case. What seems to be the case is that they have taken their Talmudic, the Babylon, sorry, the Talmudic Babylon, or however you say it, the Babylonian Talmud, right, and the Mishnah, and they have created their own new set of rules and laws afterward, and they are doing. I'm not exactly sure what they're doing, but I'm pretty clear. It's pretty clear to me that the New Testament is the new covenant. This is the God that I worship, is the one true God. This is the one that they were worshiping before all this stuff happened. I don't know who they're worshiping now because I'm looking at the results of what they're producing. And what they produce is not the results. They're not bearing the fruit of worshiping the same God as me. So I don't know what they're doing over there.
Well, that's the whole point, is that they're apostate. They're the harlot, right? That's the entire point that I'm making, is that the Jews are going through their cycle of following false gods, of rebelling against Yahweh, and that what God is doing is he's raising up the nations, right, through the Gnostic deception, through the Dwal Kul teachings and all, getting the world against who? The Zionists, harlot Jerusalem, harlot Israel. Why? For the purposes of discipline and purification in preparation for Christ's return and reign, which I think is a lot closer than a lot of people think. And we can get into timeline and we can get into the punishment periods of Judah and Israel.
Donnie, let me ask you then, because the question is, like, I agree with you on so much stuff, but then the question is, whenever I'm seeing these things and then I decide to speak about it, are we not we're supposed to watch these people run amok. We're supposed to watch these people rip down the idea of Christ as king. And I understand that that's being used as some people are using it as a battering ram, but I think that what bothers them the most is that we're saying it at all. I think it's like a knife in their side. And then if they can use it and say it's anti-Semitic, great. Whatever you can do to twist it around and get people to stop saying it. And this seems like what they're doing. So we're not supposed to oppose these people at all. We're just supposed to let them run all over us.
The question is how we do it. There's a way that the world does things, but if you're of the world, you will follow the world. But if you're set apart from the world, you will walk in the spirit. And this is where the deception becomes a tool in God's sovereign plan to do what? To sift through the wheat and the chaff, to separate the sheep and the goats, those who've listened and those who've learned from his revealed word, and those who have followed in their instincts, trusted in their wicked hearts, and have followed the world in doing things in their flawed way. And this is the pattern. This is the thematic pattern we see over and over again, especially in Old Testament Israel.
But what they're doing, what these people are doing.
Here's my thing. You keep saying what they're doing, what they're doing, what
Yes.
they're doing, but you're not asking what God's doing. This is the whole reason truthers are missing the bigger picture about what's unfolding, because the most that truthers can think about is what they're doing, what the elites are doing, what the cabal is doing, what Babylon's doing. They can't think outside of that paradigm because
No. Listen, what God is doing is he's giving me a microphone and a platform to talk about this stuff, and he's giving you one as well. So now we're going to talk about it.
But what about his sovereign plan that he's outlined through his revealed word? Why is that never in account? Why is it always a human? Why do
right?
Listen,
so
the purpose is people.
What
are
about his
giving
son,
humanity
Donnie?
too much
What about his
power.
son that died for no reason? That the
For
most
no
innocent person in the
reason?
world. Yeah, no, listen. What I'm saying, he was for
Why?
literally no reason. No,
Why?
I understand that, but so now the message that he came and brought us, we're supposed to allow these people, the ones that we're supposed to allow them to
I have
then
a question.
pervert. No, because what they're doing is perverting the message, and they're doing it outright. They're calling it what is this, like Christian Zionism? They're calling it
Christian
what is
nationalism.
again? No, whatever Ben Shapiro calls it, Judeo-Christian values. This is a perversion, and I'm calling it out. What I'm saying is that these two things have nothing to do with each other. These people, whoever they are, and I guess we can get into that
I have a
conversation. I'm not
question.
really sure, but no. There needs to be a delineation between what they are doing and what they are and what their intentions are. And I don't think God is okay with just sitting by allowing his son to be sacrificed.
I have a
and
question.
then these
Does
people
God have
blaspheming
power?
it.
Does God have power over what they're doing?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think? So why do you think he's allowing it?
Is he allowing it? Because I'm sitting here pushing back, and there's a lot of other people pushing back on it. Finally, it wasn't allowed. It was just people were too cowardice to speak against it, because
Well,
there's an entire mechanism that will slap you in the head if you do talk against it.
But hold on. But again, going back to what I was saying, do you see how everything is framed within the elites, humanity having the power? It's all under the framework that it's humanity that's in power. When the Bible clearly says that they know not what they're doing. None of the rulers understood it, right? And if none of the rulers understood it back then, why would they have so much sovereignty now? What's different about now that gives them sovereignty, right? But in the Bible, it says that they have no sovereignty. It's God who's sovereign, and he is allowing this to unfold for his purposes.
So then, Donnie, why do you do what you do?
I do what I do because I'm not trying. A lot of people make it out like I'm trying to fearmonger. I'm not trying to fearmonger at all. You either have fear of the world and worldly things and of the cabal and the elite and human plans, or you have fear of the Lord, which is a reverent fear that puts his sovereignty first. Let's look at Job, for example, right? What did Job say when he was afflicted with every worldly problem that anyone could have? He said, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away." He didn't say Satan took this away from me. He said the Lord did it.
Didn't he say it was the Jews do this to me, and then the Jews took it away? That's not what he said.
He said it was the Jews, and it was. I'm just kidding.
I'm in complete agreement with you there. I'm not saying. I think the message.
Can I just finish this?
Go ahead.
So the whole Job was a model. A lot of people read these Bible stories, but they don't see how it applies in their lives. They don't see how it applies corporately in the world today and throughout all time. Job was a model. He was a blueprint for how we are to respond to our tribulation. And the blessing he received for withstanding the trial is a foreshadow of the blessing that we will receive for withstanding our trial. And it's not to grow resentful for our worldly problems. It's not to cast blame like Eve and Adam casted blame on the serpent when confronted by God, right? It's in humbling ourselves. It's by acknowledging God's sovereignty and understanding that he is the one in control. And if you're pointing to the cabal as the manufacturers of human history, if you're pointing to some man or even Satan as the manufacturer of human events, you are giving Satan the power. And this is exactly what Satan is doing, right? Satan is very happy that the world believes that he's the one who's sovereign, that he's the one who controls these events. Satan is a pawn. If you read the Bible, Satan is never somebody who has complete autonomy and that can
he more or less keeps
my chair
fulfilling prophecy that's to his detriment, right? I mean, it's like over and over again, Satan and the fallen, they fulfill prophecy that ends with them.
But isn't that the difference between these entities and us? I mean, we are allowed to, I think,
right, we have free will. They're kind of
I don't subscribe to this like a Calvinist worldview where like things have to happen.
I'm not a Calvinist either, but let's make a delineation. When the Bible talks about election, a lot of Calvinists misinterpret that to mean, individual election from an effectual standpoint. But no, election, when you read Romans 9 through 11, election is talking about corporate election, meaning election of a group. And it doesn't mean salvific election either. It means elections for God's purposes. And Romans 9 through 11, we can go through verse by verse if you'd like, but it talks about how the Jews were chosen by God because of the patriarchs, because of the covenant with the patriarchs, and that that they are an elected group. Not that it doesn't mean that they're all saved. No, it means that God is using them for a purpose. What is that purpose? To reveal his character, just and merciful. And that's exactly what we're seeing. God is using the Jews not for the saints to cast blame on them, like Romans 11 says, the Apostle Paul, do not boast against the natural branches because you too can be cut off, right? The whole point is meant to for us to self-reflect and see their rebellion as a mirror for our rebellion. God's justice on their rebellion, his wrath on their rebellion, as a reflection, as a mirror for a warning for what happens to us when we rebel. And then his mercy, right? His mercy when even after being disciplined, even after rebelling, as a mirror for God's mercy on us. That's what they're chosen for. It's not that, oh, they're chosen, they're more righteous, they're going to be saved. That's not what that means. It means that they're chosen to reveal who God is. And this is exactly what's happening right now. This is exactly what's happening through their rebellion, through their hardening, through their spiritual blindness, like Romans 11 says, that it's temporary. It says God put a spirit of stupor in them, eyes that cannot see, until the full inclusion of the Gentiles comes. We are in the age of the time of the Gentiles, where the gospel goes out to the Gentiles. Why? To make them jealous. To make them jealous.
They revealed who God was by killing his son, and then the time of the Gentiles came shortly. They came right after. Like I feel like that's already done.
Yes, exactly. And whose sovereign plan was it to for the Jews to their own Messiah? Whose sovereign plan was it, and why? Was it Satan? Was it the Jews? It was God. This is why trutherism is a deception. This is why trutherism is leading people into doing exactly what Adam and Eve did, into doing exactly what Israel did in the Old Testament when they rebelled. What are they doing? People are following their hearts. They're following their natural inclinations to do what? To rise up in judgment, right? And that's exactly what God is doing. Everybody wants to be an instrument of God's judgment. And the ironic part is that they will be. They will be. You will be a vessel of wrath. You will be a tool of God's judgment. But then judgment will come upon you. Look at the plagues in Zechariah 14:12, given to the armies that surrounded Jerusalem, that besieged Jerusalem in the last days, right before Christ returns. It says that their eyes rots in their sockets, their tongue rots in their mouths. What are these plagues? These are the same plagues talked about in Revelation, and the plagues of Exodus was a foreshadow of that. Just like how God used Pharaoh. It says that God hardened Pharaoh. God
Donnie,
hardened him.
what kind of judgment do you think happens to the people who have let the church be subverted by the Schofield Bible and by Judeo-Christian values?
Let's talk about the Schofield Bible. Tell me what you know about the Schofield Bible.
I know it's a Jewish trap, dude. Listen,
No. Let's get
what
into
I
specifics.
do know.
We'll
talk about the modern church right now. You can go into any modern church, most of them, and
I want to talk about the Schofield Bible.
There'll be an American flag flying right next to an Israeli flag.
Let's start from the.
And I'd like to know why. Okay, well, tell me about it. Yeah,
let's start from the foundation, right? Let's start from the bottom and we'll work our way up. Tell me about the Schofield Bible.
Oh, you tell me.
Well, I mean, you said it's a. Tell me.
Yeah.
Tell me about how it's a Rothschild funded Bible that subverted most of Christianity, and how it created the myth that Jesus was a Jew, right?
No, not necessarily, but it created an entire generation of pastors that prioritize Israel over America, wherever they are.
Is the Schofield Bible a translation?
No, it's like a teaching, like a side teaching.
So like what? Okay, so let's say I have a Schofield Bible. I open it up.
Mm-hmm.
What am I gonna see? What's it gonna look like?
You're gonna see the Bible, and then in most cases there'll be like a commentary right next to whatever you're reading.
We're like a footnote.
Yeah, on the side, or maybe even
on
a
the
separate
side,
page. Mm-hmm.
Or on the bottom.
On the side or on the bottom. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on whatever you're reading. There's tons of these.
Is it big? Is like what does it look like? Is it like does it have like the Bible verse and then right next to it like the commentary, or is it like footnotes on the bottom of the pages?
There are footnotes on the bottom, and I've seen the footnotes on the side, on the right-hand side.
You've seen notes taken on the side.
Yes.
Okay. You've seen people write notes on the side of it.
No, I've seen them printed, Donnie. Listen, I grew up in the church, and I understand that they read this stuff in order to pass the seminary.
What are some of the specific things that the Schofield Bible says that you disagree with? What are some specific teachings? What are some specific footnotes?
What are some specific footnotes? What do you mean?
What are some specifics?
What I'm going to tell you now is what they teach is what the church is right now, because every Christian seminary that graduates from the colleges, in order to get a job in an Assemblies of God church, this is the curriculum that's being taught.
Let's get specific. What passages?
Why get specific? Because I'm looking at the product.
Because that's
all right.
That's the
who
whole
made
thing.
this, and why is it in there, and why do we study it?
Darby, Schofield. Here's the thing. I need to make clear. I'm not a Zionist, right? I'm not somebody who's like, oh, Israel can do no wrong. We need to support Israel. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying Israel is the harlot, right? They're the faithless wife who broke their covenant with the Lord that will be judged by the beast and his kings, right? And who supports the beast and the kings and his kings? Well, the nations do. Right? Why do the nations support the beast and his kings to destroy Mystery Babylon, the harlot? Because exactly what the truther movement is doing right now. They're highlighting all of the Jewish elements, right? And it's getting everyone to say, okay, anything that's Jewish is evil, right? That's what the Gnostics do. Anything that's Jewish is evil. And it's framing reality. It's reframing reality to where Jesus isn't even a Jew anymore. Jesus is actually an Arab, right? He actually was at Shambhala, right? And he was in Tibet, and he, when he was 12 years old, he went to India, And Christ is actually conscious of this. Do you see what I'm saying about the
What is the
rabbit
Jew?
hole?
What exactly is a Jew?
Yehudi.
Well, hold on, guys.
Yehudi.
Please pause. We're
Yeah,
at
no,
the
no, but
40-minute mark.
But okay,
We're
yeah,
at the 40-minute mark. We
okay.
have to go to patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad. I'm sorry to interrupt. For the audience who's watching, if you want to continue engaging with this conversation, engaging with the chat and enjoying an ad-free viewing experience, also gaining access before this episode releases to the general public, patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad is the place you want to be, and you can sign up for free. So hurry on over there and continue being a part of this conversation. One more time, guys, patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad. Otherwise, we are now closing the stream to everywhere else but that place. So guys, go ahead. Please continue.
Bye, people.
Yes. Okay. What is a Jew? What is a Jew?
Yes.
A Jew means biblically a descendant from Judah, right? So it comes from one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay. So after the kingdom of Israel split, the southern kingdom, Judah, was where Jerusalem and the temple were, right? Which are fundamental to the faith, fundamental to the biblical story, let's say. Over time, people from Judah and Benjamin and Levi, these were the tribes who remained loyal to the temple in Jerusalem. They were called Jews, right? So being a Jew wasn't originally just a religion. It was an ethnic and tribal identity rooted in God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and specifically Judah, the royal line, right? Now, if you have a Bible, open it up to Genesis 49, verse 10. It says the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes. Right? So what is it saying? God promised that the kingdom, the Messiah, and the rule over the nations would come through Judah, right? That means that the Messiah would be born a Jew from the tribe of Judah to fulfill the promise, right? So Jesus fulfilled that prophecy because he was born in Bethlehem, the city of David, and he was born of the tribe of Judah, Matthew 1, Luke 3. Right? He's called the Lion of the tribe of Judah in Revelation chapter 5, verse 5. So yes, Jesus is Jewish, and that's not incidental, right? That's not a minor detail. It's completely central to whom he is and the covenant that he fulfills, right? John 4. Let's open up our John 4.
Okay, I get it, but what are these people? Are these people are not the same thing.
Okay, were they this? Okay. Differentiate. How do you say that?
Differentiation.
Donnie, are you letting David? You're letting David tell you words?
Yeah, that's why I'm an expert in messing up words. Actually, wait. Before you do that, Donnie, I would like to pose a question and just give me the floor for a second so I can get this out without any interruptions here. So, I recognize what you're saying, especially on X, and I think it's going to leave X soon. This like Jew noticing thing is manufactured. And I don't agree with going the same direction as everybody else, where they're all just funneling into this. They're siloed into blaming the Jews blanket for, all of the world's ailments, and the buck stops there. And so I am a proponent of there is a much larger spiritual aspect to this entire debacle that we find ourselves in. And I also have a hard time attributing it to the Jews, right? Because just even in layman's, right? This is above my pay grade. You guys are much more well-versed in the Bible than I am. However, when I go to like the corner store in the deli and there's a Jewish guy working in there, certainly he's not to blame for everything that ails the word. So, or ails the world rather. So my question, Donnie, is when I go to Revelation 3:9, just to bring that up again, and they're talking about these, they will call themselves Jews, but are not there of this. I see that as an attempt to differentiate, right? Between the Jews and something else. My question to you, Donnie, is, am I misinterpreting that?
No, I don't think so necessarily. The Revelation 2:9 and 3:9 is like the go-to passages for the anti-Jew people. And what's funny is most of the people that quote those passages, they don't know anything about the Bible. When you press them on like biblical things, they look at you like you have four heads. Like if I ask them, okay, what is John chapter 4, verse 22 says, where it says, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. That's Jesus talking, and I asked them, what does that mean? Tell me the context of that. They don't know they didn't even know that verse existed. Right. And the whole point here is that, the passages like this, which if you want to talk about them real quick, I gladly can. In Revelation chapter 2:9 and 3:9, when it talks about those who say they are Jews but are not and do lie. There's different ways that people interpret them.
Can I tell you how I interpret it? And I may well be interpreting it like those people, but
Sure.
from the outside looking in, I'm very much a new Christian, and this is all learning process. In fact, much of this show is about me learning in real time with the audience, and I think that's probably
but hold on. I mean, I remember this verse as well, the John 22, but that's not the whole thing. I mean, so what are you getting at here?
What do you mean?
Let's just talk about that verse really quick.
Yeah,
what that
salvation
means.
is from the Jews. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that means?
What's the next verse?
Let's open it up. John 4.
Let's open it up.
Let's go to John 4.
Okay. But the hour cometh, and now is when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. It's not like a condemnation of what this person was. Yes, the salvation is of the Jews. It came from them.
Right.
But
what? Yes.
Now what?
Okay. Right. Now what? Verse 23 explains exactly what I'm saying. That now is the time where worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. What does that mean? He's referring to the time of the Gentiles, where the gospel goes out to the Gentiles, because he's speaking to a Gentile woman. He's speaking to a Samaritan woman, right? What he's saying.
But the point of that
exactly
scripture. No, the point of that scripture is not that this is specifically for the Jews. It has really nothing to do with the Jews.
That's not what I'm saying.
Speaking to the woman. But he's speaking to her, and he's saying he's kind of like sunning her a little bit. He's like, this is from the Jews, right? He's like, but I'm God now. Yeah, that's it. That's what that verse means. So I don't understand.
He always was God. Well, he is Yahweh. Jesus is Yahweh.
You know what I mean? This is what he's saying. Right. He's like, but now it's me, and then she recognizes it. So this is the point of that verse, not necessarily.
It's not that it's different. Jesus has always been Yahweh. Jesus, and here's the context you need to understand this passage. When he's speaking to the Samaritan woman, he's telling her that salvation is from the Jews, right? And that now is the time where the gospel goes out to the Gentiles, right? Mm-hmm. It's exactly what I'm saying. That now is the time where the Gentiles are the inclusion of the Gentiles is being fulfilled.
He says the true worshipers, not the Gentiles, the ones who are worshiping truly.
Right.
Yeah,
but this is the same language we see in the Old Testament, right?
That would imply who are the fake worshipers then?
The same ones in the Old Testament that worshipped Baal. Look at
Elijah
in
Israel now.
Yes, it's the same thing. That's what I'm saying. It's the same exact thing from the Old Testament.
But Donnie,
but this is the whole point.
They're worshiping something other. They're worshiping something other.
Just like they did in the Old Testament. That's what I'm trying to say.
And we're supposed to sit back and not.
We're supposed to follow the Lamb. We're supposed to follow the commandments of Christ. We are called to fight the real spiritual battle, which is what? Not against flesh and blood. Truthers make the spiritual fight. They make a counterfeit. I'm not saying you're a truther, but I'm saying what truthers do is that they turn the real spiritual battle that we're called to in the Bible and turn it into the same battle that the New Age is fighting. Right? That's a fight against the Jews and Yahweh, and that's the whole point. And it's going to culminate in Revelation 19:19, when Christ returns. What happens? What do the nations do when Christ returns? Do they, it says that the nations fight against him. Yep. Why? Because they will see his coming as the ultimate culmination of the New World Order. When Christ comes to reign from Jerusalem, right? And when all the nations have to make a yearly pilgrimage to Jerusalem to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, what do you think all these truthers are going to be saying? They're going to be saying the same thing. All of these truthers are the same people who are going to be rebelling against Christ, reigning from Jerusalem. And that's the setup for the little season where Satan is released to deceive the nations once more. What do you think Satan's going to be saying?
I think the Zionist New World Order.
He's going to be saying the Zionist. There's nothing new under the sun. Why? This is what I'm saying. It's full circle. Everything is full circle. These are cyclical events.
Here's the thing, though, Donnie. New. I don't think that that's the deception. I think that the New Age
You
is
don't think the deception is that people are? Wait, hold on.
Well, hold on,
How-
guys.
how do
Please,
you
we have
think
to make a
people-
decent listening experience for
Yeah.
people. Please remember that this is going to be on audio, so let's give each other some room to
I'm
speak.
sorry. I'm sorry for getting loud, but it's all right there in the Bible. It's all right there, and
Mhm.
I like the fact that I showed you this ascended master that this stuff comes from, that David Icke and all these truthers really get their teachings from, right?
Mhm.
And I'm showing you why. I'm showing you why it happens and how it's part of God's plan. You know, I don't see how you could see this any other way with all of this context, because this is the critical piece that people miss, is that these New Age truthers are the real spiritual arm of Satan's agenda, and that it's ultimately not even Satan's ultimate plan. It's God using Satan, using the human authorities, the human leaders, and using the nations to fulfill his will. And nobody can seem to demonstrate, how that's not the case. Do you see what I'm saying?
I mean, I sort of understand what you're saying. What I'm saying is that I don't think that the deception is people looking correctly at Israel and saying that's not who they say they are. There's something else.
That's not the culmination. But don't you see, that's just a stepping block. That's just one piece of it, right? People coming against the Jews is just one piece of the bigger deception.
I think what we need to draw, the line that we need to draw, the delineation, and it's going to be impossible to do it on Twitter, because people have to go through these stages of grief, which is like the stages of grief that I went through, where you go through like, oh my God, they're doing all this stuff. Oh my God.
The red pill. And that's exactly the thing.
Right. I get it. But Donnie, they got to do that. They're going to have to do that.
No, but that's part of that's the whole thing. Okay, listen, I want you to listen to like people like April Ryan and all these New Age truthers who channel ascended masters and all these people, and hear them talk about the same thing you talk about right now. That when you take the red pill, you almost get like an initial sickness, that like not a sickness, but like you're angry, you're hurt. You're going through these 5 stages. And they say that that's part of the transformation process of ascension, right? That's part of the awakening process. Right?
The thing with the New Age movement and the New Agers is that it aligns so closely to the truth that when you hear it, you want to burn it down completely. And I understand that proclivity, but there is a tremendous amount of truth in it, because they've taken the word of God, they've taken the actual like way we operate in this physical and spiritual realm, but they perverted it. They're missing this one important thing. They're missing the God. They're missing Jesus Christ in the center of it, and they've done it on purpose. So it's our job to explain it to these people, but then let them know the actual truth. We can't just sit idly by. And I understand God has a plan, and I understand that it's going to end up the way it is.
It's not. See, this is another thing that people say. Oh,
no, it is sitting idly by when you have huge names. And listen, I have 50,000 followers on X, and we have like less than 10 on YouTube. And we're just telling people like, hey, what they're telling you over here is nonsense. They're acting like they're your brothers, but in reality, they study a book that says they hate you. I think people need to wake up to that. Like, again, but when you wake up to that, they're going to wake up. When you wake up to that, they're going to wake up violently. They're going to wake up upset. And then it's the job of other people to tell them, listen, you have to calm down. You have to understand. Do not make formations. This is what Germany did. They made formations. They were controlled, and then they got firebombed. And now they still haven't recovered. Now half Germany is. That's not what I want. But you cannot allow for a cancer to exist inside of you and not point it out.
Here's the question. The cancer that lives inside of us. All right, if you could describe the root of the world's problems in one word, what would you say?
Sin.
Yes. Okay, that's the cancer. Sin is the cancer. Is that something that's exclusively in Jews?
You know what this goes to, Top? This is Owen Benjamin's The Jew in Your Own Heart.
I get it, and I get that, but you've got to also start somewhere.
Heart is crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. This is where I'm at. You have to deny those proclivities to take part in the things that they're offering you, but it's still a fact that this is a rabbi owns Pornhub. Like, what are we doing here, man?
But
And this is
But
going to be,
why?
but it's
But
going to be
why?
noticed, Donnie. It's going to be
But
noticed.
I know
And
it
then-
is. Of
but
course
then
it is.
it's
That's
noticed.
my whole point.
Here's the thing,
That's my
Donnie,
entire point. The
I
whole
get it.
world is going to notice it. That's my point.
No,
The
this is what we're
entire
saying
world is
too.
going to notice it. This is
This
my
is what-
entire point.
This is what we're saying too. But,
And you're going to join the world, unless, well, you might, maybe not you, but most people are going to join the world in doing what? In fighting to preserve their earthly paradise, in clinging on to their lives, in clinging on to what they have here in this world. And in doing that, they are being deceived into fighting the wrong fight. And that's going to culminate in Revelation 19 when the world fights against Christ in his return, in their zealousness, in their paranoia, in their desire, in their self-righteousness, in their desire to rid the world of evil before the appointed time. They will be led into being the very armies that will fight against Christ, and that God uses to discipline and purify Judah and Israel. That's the context. That
I don't think that's not going to lead. In my opinion, it doesn't lead exactly that
people
way.
aren't getting. This is my whole point. This is the crucial context that will lead people away from the New Age Gnostic deception, the false light deception, is that context. And that's the context that no truther is saying.
Wait, what's the context? Can you reiterate that, Donnie?
It's not the context. The context is the first commandment is real and it exists for a reason. It's the first one. Thou shalt take no gods before me. The context is there are other gods. There are many of them. They are returning. They will come.
And who's sovereign?
Right. But okay, tell that to people who don't know. When you have an alien invasion or whatever come down, our ascended masters show their face and start performing miracles. Start telling these people about the sovereignty of God. That's
what they need to hear. That's what they need to hear.
Okay, but now how can they hear that if we've allowed Judeo-Christian values to pervade our churches?
What do you mean by Judeo-Christian values? What does that mean?
Explain. I don't know. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
It means
Nobody
nothing.
knows. This is what I'm saying. The people who say, "Oh, it's not Judeo-Christian." Okay, explain it then. Explain what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is we have nothing. What I mean by that, I'm sorry, Donnie, I got to mute you. We have nothing to do with whatever the current Judaism is right now. Christianity has nothing to do with that.
Isn't that obvious? But isn't that a surface level?
No, it's not.
How hard is that to figure out?
Look at the body of the church. Right? Do you go to church? You go to church, Donnie?
Yes. The bigger picture. This is what I'm saying. People aren't seeing the big picture, and it's the truthers who are the ones giving you just a small purview, and they're missing out so much context that will help people wake up from the false light awakening deception. That's my whole point.
I get that. I understand what you're saying, but I do think that there needs to be some sort of meaningful pushback. We are not spiritual entities.
There will be.
We're not spiritual entities.
Right now.
Donnie, you're going to let me talk. This
they
is
don't
my
need
show.
Help.
We're not spiritual entities whose fate has been decided. Okay. We are human beings. And as human beings.
Our fate has been decided.
No, it hasn't. There's multiple times in the Bible where the human beings are communicating with God or doing something, and it says, and God was surprised by that. This is not, your fate is not decided.
Well, hold on.
We're allowed to move and do whatever we want. The spiritual beings that are going to fulfill the prophecy, they already have fulfilled the prophecy. It's already happened. There's nothing they can do. That's why they're in such torment constantly, because they made this covenant. They've been judged. It's over. We have not been judged. People can still change. So it's our job when I'm looking at people perverting the religion, when I'm looking at them saying things and playing this like weird sleight of hand stuff where they're like, oh, we have a Jordan Peterson on and he's going to teach you about Jesus Christ. Then you ask him, do you believe in God? And he goes, what do you mean by God? This is a perversion. No. I'm pointing to people who have
exactly. You're pointing to people who don't know what they're doing. This is my whole.
I'm pointing to people who have the sway of the popular culture right now, who are followed by millions and millions of people. This is who I'm pointing to.
Okay, I'm pointing to the sovereign Lord. And I'm pointing to how he's using these people that you're talking about, how he's using them to accomplish his overarching purposes. That's the disconnect. It's like, I get everything you're saying. I'm not disagreeing with you there. What I'm saying is, why is this happening? And how is it working to fulfill God's purposes? That's what you're not addressing. That's what no truther addresses. And they can't address it because it doesn't fit in their worldview. Why? Because their worldview is in conjunction with the New Age. And I'm not saying you're in conjunction with the New Age. I'm saying that the truther movement, the whole point of the truther movement is to fulfill the New Age awakening, that the cabal has been hiding our divinity from us, and that the Jews are the chosen people of this false god, and that we need to rebel, expose, and fight the Jews in order to liberate humanity from the matrix prison of the material world. That's what I'm saying. And that's where no one can seem to address that. They always have to point to this person or that group. Right. But it's like you're missing so much, and whether you like it or not, you're leading people right into the arms of the New Age awakening deception. That's my point. That's all
I think you are. I think actually you are. I think that
by telling people to submit, by telling people to fight the good fight the Apostle Paul talked about, and not taking a preemptive role of judging the nations, which will be given to us, as Revelation 2 says, but only after the resurrection. Right now, it is the duty for us to judge those within the church, like the Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians.
Yeah, who's within the church, Donnie? Go to your church and look at the flags that are flying there. Listen to the message that they're preaching. You would not be able to find a church that does not preach Christian Zionism at least once a month, Donnie.
What is Christian Zionism?
Christian Zionism is putting Israel's needs first before the church.
Okay.
Whatever the church is these days. I don't know. It's a McDonald's now.
Here's this. I agree with you that, you know, the idol worship of Israel is wrong. I agree with you there. Now here's another question. Do you agree with me
that it's pervasive in the church?
Here's another question. What's that?
Do you agree with me that it's pervasive in the modern church in America?
Sure.
In the strip mall church.
It's becoming less so, for
less
sure.
So? No.
Yeah. Would you not say that the red pill awakening is unfolding?
No, but not for anybody that goes to church. Listen, anybody that goes to church.
Believe it or not, in my church right now, there are people in my church right now who are saying the same thing that you're saying. There are people in my church right now who are talking about, you know, how there's an awakening unfolding and how you know, the world is noticing. There are people in my church who follow Q and say that, you know, that the storm is upon us, that judgment is coming. Right. But they're not talking about God's judgment. Well, they say it's God's judgment, but it's not. It's the beast's war on Babylon. This stuff is becoming very popular. I think people really underestimate this awakening, this false awakening, and how big and mainstream it's becoming. Right.
I would say that Top and I actually agree with that. We've been saying for a while now that this conversation that's been taking place on Twitter or on other social media, predominantly X, was eventually going to leave the platform and enter, you know, the dinner table, for I guess lack of a better way of putting that. But yeah, I mean, everything else is downstream. So if this culture is really exploding on X, then it's only a matter of time till it's in your church.
It's
I agree with you, Donnie, and I agree with you, and I understand what's happening, and it's out of our hands at this point. But the truth of the matter still is, these things cannot coexist. The current Judaism, the modern day Judaism, Babylonian Talmudic Judaism, cannot coexist. Cannot coexist with whatever Christianity was supposed to be. And when I look at the church, it's garbage. The modern church is garbage now. It's completely lost its way.
What does God do about
it? I don't know. What does he do about it?
He raises up the nations to do what?
I don't think so, man. Listen, I don't think this is.
You don't think so? Hold on. So hold on.
Okay, hold on.
Let's open up our
This
Bibles.
has not been the first time. I know. Open up your Bibles, but this has not been the first time that this has happened. There's nothing new under the sun, and you cannot allow your church to be pervaded and perverted by people. Simple as that.
Listen, I agree with you that making an idol out of Israel is wrong. But answer me this question: do you believe that God is using Israel for his overarching purposes, or is that just outside of God's sovereignty? He's just not powerful enough to shape human events.
Yeah, probably. Would agree that it's all been written and everything is headed in the direction that.
Would you say that God is? Would you say that God is the one who's sovereign over that?
Yeah.
Okay. Daniel 2 says that God is the one who raises up nations, not men. If anyone is telling you that man raised up a nation and that God had nothing to do with it, they are of the a lying spirit, because it says God is the one who raises nations. God is the one who puts human authority where they are. He's the one
So
who
then,
raises
Donnie,
up
how are
kings.
we meant to? I think what's important here is to establish how are we meant to react to that.
Yes, and this is the big picture thing
Like do
that
nothing.
people, and see, this is what the new age people say. Okay, there was a black woman who commented on my post today, right? And this is crazy. Okay, let me see if I can find it. She is saying that what I'm saying is that we need to bow to Jews and do nothing, right? And then she continued to say that Yahweh is the real enemy, and that the Jews are his chosen people, and that anyone defending that are enemies of mankind.
That's very
right?
like Gnostic, New Agey.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Now, where is that heading? That's heading to the persecution of the saints. Why? Because they refuse to join the beast's rebellion, right? They refuse to join the world. They refuse to not be set apart. And this is exactly what's coming. People are going to persecute the saints, believing that they're liberating the planet from an evil God and his forces. And this is exactly the whole point of the New Age truther movement. And that's why Christian truthers are mistakenly picking up their fight. And, and that goes to the question, like, what are we supposed to do about it? What are we supposed to do about it? Well, who's in control? Contrary to what I used to believe, it's not any human group or even Satan, it's God. He's the one calling the shots, and even Satan can only do what God permits.
Right.
So so trusting in God's plan is tough. Absolutely, it's hard. Did the Israels trust God's plan in the Old Testament? No. They trusted in their own works. They trusted in their own plans over God's sovereignty time and time again, and that's why they rebelled, thinking that they could take matters into their own hands.
You know what I think
right?
it is? I think it's an interpretation thing. When you hear that, it sounds like God is the implementer of all these horrifying things, but that's not as nuanced as it actually is, right? It's like God is judging these fallen entities and is allowing them to execute their plan so that they can be judged by the end of it. So he is allowing all of this,
So he
but
can
we know
judge-
how it ends.
Yeah, so he can judge not only these entities, but he can judge the hearts of the nations, right? He uses this deception. It says in 2 Thessalonians 2, who sends the strong delusion in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 11? Is it Satan? Is it the Jews? Is it the Illuminati? No, it's God. God sends the strong delusion. Why? Because he is using this as a judgment against those who are already being steered by their hearts and not through the spirit. And this is exactly why the New Age is the spiritual arm of this deception, because it perfectly inverts biblical truth and makes the God of the Bible the enemy, and it makes his plan a manufactured plan of the Illuminati. That's the whole point. And how do we respond to this? Well, it's about it's about how we handle it. Is God shows us how to face challenges, gracefully, trusting in his perfect control over our lives. But it's not about being perfect. It's about being faithful, keeping his commands because we love him, and walking in love as we are commanded to. And if you stumble, you pick up your cross and you keep walking. Right? Like, think of Peter's trial. Right? Out on the stormy sea, Jesus called him to walk in the water. When Peter stepped out in faith, he started sinking when he took his eyes off Jesus and he focused on the chaos around him. We are making the same mistake that Peter made, focusing on all the waves and the wind and the storm, not keeping our focus on Christ. What happened when he stopped focusing on Christ? He started to drown. And that's what we're doing. That's the deception, is drowning in the chaos of the world rather than focusing on Christ.
That would fit into this idea that like Satan is the adversary, right? And that he has a role to play, and that he's not sovereign, he's not independent, he doesn't have real agency. He's here to fulfill a role. And in that way, sort of the development of I guess mankind, our own development in our overcoming our challenges with him.
Yes.
But it's like he's not this independent actor
No.
who is got really any power at all. But it can look like that, right? And I guess
Yes.
that's what everybody's falling for, is the look like that aspect, where if you look around, you see their symbols, you see, you know, the ways in which they engage and they deceive.
Yes. That's the bait.
Yeah, it's the bait, and it's also the base level, right? Where if you peel
Yes.
back, so
Surface level.
this goes back to my question that I don't think I really got a satisfactory answer for, which is to say that if the Bible seeks to differentiate between those who call themselves Jews and who are not, but are actually of the, is that an actual differentiation that's, or is that a descriptive of the Jews? Because I interpret it as a differentiation, and I go, well, if the Bible sees fit to differentiate, then I should as well, because there's so much variety among, you know, self-identified Jews. You know, we bumped into a atheist Zionist Jew the other day. I'm like, I don't even know what that is. That's crazy. And so it's like, how can these things be the same thing?
Whatever they want it to be, I guess. I
Well,
mean, there's so much
right.
obfuscation.
So
What-
let
that's the
me
whole thing.
refine that question, and I'd like an answer from that to the best of your abilities, Donnie. Are we? Is that a differentiation that's being made in 3:9, or am I wrong in my interpretation of it?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not a blanket category of all Jews, right? Like Jesus isn't saying, "Oh, all Jews are the." That's how a lot of the truthers interpret it, but that's
It
certainly
seems like
not
he's
what
saying
saying.
there will be those who claim
There will
to
be
be.
those who claim to be, and what I personally think is it's talking about the merchants of mystery Babylon, right? You look at a lot of these Jewish people in power; a lot of them are secular, right? A lot of them aren't. You know, a lot of these people, they're atheists, right? A lot of the communist Jews, the Marxists, a lot of them are atheists. A lot of them, you know, they're part of the world, right? They're not. They're in their very much in their thinking and in their attitude, right? But still,
Very materialistic, yeah.
Yes, very
This is the problem.
materialistic.
They use the title, and they might, most of them probably aren't even Jewish ethnically. Like there's been
Right.
studies that show like that, like a lot of these people's bloodline doesn't even go back to whatever they say it is. It's nonsense. But they're using the title, so like we're in agreement there. They're under
But
this
there are
Jew thing.
but here's the thing. Here's what we have to understand. The remnants of Judah and Israel have been regathered, like Ezekiel 37 said it would. You know what I mean? Right before Christ returns. Are you familiar with the dry bones prophecy?
No, tell us.
Yes. So the dry bones prophecy in Ezekiel 37 talks about the Jews being regathered from all the nations of the world back to their homeland, but not in righteousness, but in judgment, right? And that's the bones, and then the flesh appears, right? And then the spirit comes after, right? So that's what we're seeing right now. The bones appeared, right? The flesh is returning, right? They're in the flesh, and then the spirit will come through their tribulation, through this coming global revolution against them. That's going to be what leads them to the spirit, right? And that's why I said earlier, I believe was used by God, right? For judgment purposes, and also for the purposes of their future redemption, of the redemption.
Well, I think
of
that
the
is fair to say, because without, you would have to say then God isn't in control of everything that happens on his creation. And I don't know that you could say that.
Right. You can't, and that's the thing, is like, you have to acknowledge God's sovereign hand in everything, in every human, in all of human history. And this is why the truthers can't see what's really happening, is because they're stopping at the human leaders who the Bible says are powerless, that their plans will come to naught, right? And this is where the misdirection is that people are so hyper focused on human plans and human leaders. They're not seeing how God is working through all these things to bring about what he prophesied. And that's all I'm trying to do, is trying to show people the big picture and not to get swept up in the world's panic. Proverbs 29, I think it's verse 25. It says, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. And this is the thing. All of these truthers, all of these people, all these red pill people, they are steeped in fear of man, fear of what man can do to them physically. That's why the Bible says, do not fear those who can harm the body, but fear the one who can kill both body and soul in hell, right? All of these passages are trying to show us something. It's trying to show us that the world is always going to be steeped in fear of man. And that's what the truther movement is. It's the fears and anxieties of man-made plans, man-made plots, and offering them a man-made prescription, right? That the multi-faith coalition of the nations to come together and say, you know what? We all have our differences, but you know what our common enemy is? The Jews, the Zionists, and that mindset that God is going to judge that. How is he going to judge that? Well, first, he's going to use them as an instrument of judgment. And then he's going to judge those people. He's killing two birds in one stone. He's using, and it's so beautiful when you really take a step back and see what's happening and see how God is using all of these pieces for his overarching purposes. You can see, wow, it is absolutely brilliant. It is perfect.
And there's no room in the middle here for you. So I understand, yes, God has a plan, but I think you're short selling. You're short selling God's gift to us of free will to do what we want.
I absolutely believe in free will.
God's even repented. He's repented for making man. He was surprised. There's been like I said, multiple times in the Bible where he's been kind of his reaction was like, "Whoa, you actually did that?" That's kind of crazy. So
right, but
I don't know if God knows every single thing that we're going to do before we do it. I think that he created us and he enjoys watching us do. But the question is, again, my question is in between his plan of basically setting up the Jews to set up everybody else, which is a hilarious plan. There's nowhere for us to also reach the people who are going to fall through the cracks, because we're talking about billions of people. And I'm talking to the ones who will listen like, yeah, I get what you're saying. I was there too. I see what they're doing. It's horrible. I agree with you. But we're not going to, don't form against them, but also resist them. There has to be some sort of
gospel. Through the gospel.
You can resist them in many ways, not just through the gospel, but like people who reject
my point.
People who don't even believe in God. Okay, and they're gonna go ahead and you want to form a Christian movement. The ones that don't believe in God is like, no, that's not the way. But you also don't have to do what they're telling you to do here. You can also see that this is a clear enemy. And listen, it is what it is. They've declared themselves an enemy of America, but with their actions, this is a clear enemy. We don't have you don't want to redo this. We don't want to make the same mistakes we did before, but we can look at it and go, not here, man. You got to go. Not here.
We can look at it and say, wow, God's plan is unfolding exactly like.
Or we can fashion our whip and say, get that shit out of the temple because it does not belong here.
See, this is exactly what I'm saying. Do you know David Icke says that same thing, right?
David Icke's somebody clip this.
So why are you saying the same thing that David? Wait.
Because what am I saying? David Icke also says a lot of words that I say. I mean, so what? He says some things that I say.
Where does he get his teachings? Where does David Icke get his teachings from?
From ancient Atlanteans that he's channeled years ago that he used to write his books. All in angels.
Why are Christians regurgitating the same thing?
The Bible?
Spirits? No.
Why is he quoting the Bible?
Why does Satan not quote the Bible to get people to?
So you just quoted the Bible 100 times here, Donnie.
But that's the whole point. Satan doesn't make up new lies. That's why his deceptions are so.
But
brilliant.
It's not a lie. It's not a lie. What Jesus did when the Pharisees were in the temple, money changing, he told them, "You got to get out of here. You can't do that."
And what do you think? What do you think that is supposed to mean for us?
That means you can't do that here. We have to have some kind of sacred place. We have nothing. We've completely ceded.
But this is what I'm saying. I'm glad you're saying this, because this is exactly my point. Is that
not America? I'm talking about the church. I'm talking about the church. Like, if we're going to preach the message of Jesus Christ, how could you do it in a place that's been what's the correct word? Compromised for the last 50, 60 years, maybe more. Maybe since its inception,
in all sorts of ways, and that's why you wake people up to deception. But my thing is, that's not what the truthers are saying to do. They're not saying to expose the wicked ones from among us. They're saying to go out into the world and expose what the world is doing, and that's why, because of worldly fear, because of fear of man, like Proverbs 25 says. Let's look at Isaiah.
But also, Donnie,
8.
Can I ask you a question? Who has the birthright to this world? Who was this world given to?
Jesus Christ and the saints and the resurrected saints.
This was given to man. It was given to man initially, go tend and to dominate. And we just give that up because, well, prophecy says in the end, this is, how do you know for sure this is the end? How do you know that we haven't been here before and this will be repeated again? Like, we don't know, but we're just going to give this up, like give up what was given to us.
We can get into the calendrical prophetic timeline, the 6,000 years, the 100.
Yeah, but people thought the same thing in 70 AD in Jerusalem. They thought the same thing. So now here we are 2,000 years later saying everybody just chill out and wait. And
nobody in 70 AD thought that we were close to biblical year 6,000. That's something completely different.
Look, before we go on, can I pose a question? When we're looking at Jesus Christ and he's flipping over the tables in the temples and he's chasing out the merchants and he's fashioning this whip.
Yes.
As Christians, can we look to that, be inspired, and do the same thing in our time? And what would that look like?
Okay. Jesus cleansing the temple, number one, was a fulfillment of prophecy, okay, from the Old Testament, right? Why did he do that? Because the temple was his father's house. The temple was his father's house, and he was the Father. He was God. That was God cleansing his own house, right? That's the context. That's the thematic context of what's happening there. It was God cleaning his own house from corruption, right? And that's exactly what we're called to do, is to clean up our own house. But here's the thing: is your home the world? But that's the whole point. What's our home? Is it the world? Is it America? Is it what is our home? And that's the thing. It's like, hey, if you're saying America is your home, if you're saying the world is your home, then fine, the world is your home, and be with the world. That's fine. What I'm saying is, the saints, the resurrected saints in the millennium, they're going to be those who set themselves apart from the world. They're going to be the ones that recognize that their home is not in this world, that we are sojourners in this fallen realm to do what? To assist in the proliferation of the gospel to the Gentiles until the culmination of thereof, in which these end-time events happen.
I don't completely agree with that. I think that God created this realm. I think that it's fantastic. And I think that the more that you look at it, it represents who we are in so many different ways, from just like the composition of everything around you. It's beautiful. And we are forfeiting that. You're forfeiting that?
Wait, no. Here's the problem. I agree with you that the world is beautiful. God isn't coming to destroy the world, right? God isn't coming to just gather us up and take us into heaven and destroy the world like a lot of people think. No, God is bringing heaven to earth. But it's all about the appointed time. How many times in Jesus's ministry did the apostles ask him if he was going to reestablish the kingdom of Israel, if he was going to reestablish, God's kingdom? And he said that now is not the time. Now is not the time. And that's the whole thing. People. And that's why this the dominionism is so popular, because people
Donnie,
want
he said,
heaven on earth right now.
It sounds like you want heaven on earth now. We don't know if it's now. Jesus said now's not the time. And then his apostles went out there,
establish the kingdom.
Donnie, his apostles went out there and they were all brutally trying to protect his teachings. Yeah.
They were,
because how do you know if here's the thing, if now is not the time, we don't know the time or place. It could be in 1,000 years from now.
For what?
The time for Jesus to return.
To do what? To defeat the nation?
No, I'm saying, well, let's talk. We're talking about the church. I don't care about the nations. I don't really care. America is what it is.
So then why are all the truthers? I'm
not dumb. I'm talking about
for them.
Yeah, I'm talking. I'm actually speaking against them. I've been doxxed by them. They freaking sent like a trove of people and then remove them from my follower account just to mess with my algorithm for saying exactly what I'm saying now. So I am not them. It's a straw man that is being put on. It's very frustrating. What I'm saying is that we cannot do nothing. This place is special. It was given to us. There's no guarantee that this is going to be over in 2025 because Alice Bailey said so.
Question. Do you think I'm saying to do nothing?
Sometimes I think it's like,
it
can be perceived as that.
Okay, pretend to be me for a second. Tell me what you think the solution is to the world, the problems of the world.
I think it's the truth, but I think the solution is a guided truth, and it needs to come out in a way.
But who's it guided by? Is it guided by Dwal Cool and his prescription and how we need to unite the world needs to unite and overthrow the Zionist system? Is that
I don't have as much of a biblical grounding as you guys, but I do recognize human psychology, and I do recognize that if you should mobilize and try to attack a thing, what happens is your movement, because there's so many moving pieces, becomes co-opted, becomes
Mhm.
corrupted, and eventually is aimed in the entirely wrong direction, and that the real work
Every time.
is internal. And that is,
Yeah.
and I recognize that.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so if you were, I don't know what you would say, Donnie, but if you asked me what you should do, what action you should take in these times, by the way, not having this, extensive biblical background, I would say that the work is internal, that you can't hope to affect the outside without taking care of the sin that you carry inside.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. That's the whole point of this of what's unfolding is God is using those who say in their heart, "I am righteous." I am a righteous warrior for God. Defending the world from a threat. Right? I am the righteous one. I am a warrior. I am whatever. And they're not fighting the good spiritual battle of dying to self daily, of laying down our desires, of casting the flesh aside and walking in the spirit, which is the real battle, which is hard. That's a hard battle to crucify the flesh daily.
The New Age
That is a
movement has
lot
almost
harder. Yeah.
created a caricature of that
It
too.
sounds
Like,
new agey, right?
well,
Like
in the New Age movement, the
Mhm,
equivalent
mhm.
to that would be like this super isolated meditative process where you become some ascended master
ego
because you're
death.
no longer in the world. You're out of the world entirely, to the extent where you ascend past your mortal coil
This is
or
why
whatever.
it's kind of disingenuous to be like, that sounds new agey. It's like, yeah, most of Christianity sounds new agey when you actually look at it in the correct manner, but it's just been subverted. So now I'm not allowed to use this word the same way. Like if I say Jew, now Jew means everything. It's
So yeah,
That's what it
it's
is.
got to mean something.
Yeah, the New Age isn't just random deception. It's calculated specifically to counterfeit the truths of God. But I
Yeah.
want to go back to this trusting in God and being blessed thing that I think a lot of people miss, and it's a biblical concept. And most people who are in these conspiracy circles, they read online forums more than they read their Bible. So, like, okay, in Hezekiah, for example, right? Okay, the Assyrian Empire was the superpower of the time, right? And they had already wiped out the northern kingdom of Israel, and they were now surrounding Jerusalem, right? So Assyria threatens Judah. The Assyrian king sends his messenger to mock God, threaten Jerusalem, and urge the people to surrender. Okay, what was Hezekiah's response? Right? He doesn't make a military alliance. He doesn't try to appease Assyria, and he doesn't rely on Egypt, their neighbors, for political strategies or yoking with the world. What does he do? He goes to the temple. He spreads the letter before the Lord and prays. He says, "O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord." And what was God's response? He sends the prophet Isaiah to tell Hezekiah not to be afraid. And then that night, the angel of the Lord strike down, I think it was like 180,000 Assyrian soldiers, and the army flees. So what's the result? Total victory, no fighting, no joining the world. Judah is saved. Why? Because Hezekiah trusted in the Lord instead of human strength. Right? That now Hezekiah ended up declining. Why? Because of pride and judgment. Again, this is a mirror for us. When we read the Bible, you have to see that it's pointing to something. Okay, later in Hezekiah's reign, after he recovered from an illness where he almost died, the envoys from Babylon, they visit to congratulate him. And instead of glorifying God, Hezekiah shows them all his treasures, boasting in his wealth and his strength. And Isaiah rebukes him. So the prideful act leads to the prophecy of the Babylonian captivity, because Hezekiah trusted in his own glory, he trusted in his own strength, right? Instead of saying, this was God's strength, this was God's power, and this is the common theme. This is the pattern. When Israel or its king trusted in God, God delivered them supernaturally, right? And that's what Christ's return is. It's a supernatural redemption of the saints from the worldly problems, right? And the pattern repeats throughout scripture. They trust in Egypt, they're punished later. They trusted in God during Jehoshaphat's reign, and they had victory without even having to battle. Later on, they trusted in foreign idols that led to their exile, right? And the whole point is that, first of all, God doesn't judge Israel because they're evil, right? He judges them because, they're his, and he uses the nations, even the wicked ones, as instruments of this discipline, and those same nations are then judged for their pride and cruelty. So do you see how within this framework, God is judging and purging both the wicked from, Judah and Israel, but also from the Gentiles? And this is what I'm saying. He's killing two birds in one stone. And the whole point of the truther movement is to get you on the side of the false light, to get you on one side. And I would say, there's definitely, the other side to this as well, that says, Israel can do no wrong and all this, right? They're missing their judge out on how God is judging them as well. But this is what I'm saying is, like, this can all be understood within the purview of how God is using everybody, all human agents, to fulfill his plan. And my whole point is not to become a vessel of wrath, but to become an instrument or vessel of mercy, of his mercy and grace. Because remember, what was the revelation? What's the revelation all about? It's all about revealing who God is, a just judge and a merciful redeemer. And that's the story of Israel. And we're watching that play out right now. Why? It's a reflection of our own hearts and a call for us to repent and trust in the Lord. That's what the truthers will never tell you because they don't understand it.
Donnie, I see this happening. And I'm in agreement with you that this is all a big, and whether or not it's a new age movement, I would have to look into that a little bit more, but I do recognize, like, the truth or the conspiracy movement, which is made up predominantly right now of a lot of people who just woke up during COVID, which is a little problematic because when you just wake up, which even that is a very expression, you tend to fall for a lot of shit. And once somebody shows you a bad guy, you tend to zero in on that bad guy as if it's the end all be all. And I know that I have been running with this idea that beyond the Jews, this is a spiritual battle. But then at the same time, I do recognize that you either believe in God's plan or you don't believe in God's plan. And you either believe that God is in control or you don't believe that God is in control. If you do believe that he's in control, then you have to then lend yourself to, like, oh, the reason Satan is called the adversary is because these are pieces that are being moved around. They don't really have any like I said, agency. They just kind of fulfill prophecy that ends up with them being damned in the end. They're already damned. And so my question, Donnie, is for this new age movement or this truther movement or these new conspiracy theorists who are moving towards the Jews, linked in arms and ready to, I don't know what, cast them out of the country Crusade. Or some shit like that. Does it end with the Jews? Like, is this their
it doesn't, and that's the whole thing. Yes, that good question. That's a great question, and that's the whole thing. It doesn't end with the Jews, because who also gets persecuted in the last days? The saints, right? The saints become martyrs at the hands of the beast and those who follow him. Now, why is that? Well, from all of this context, we can deduce that the reason why is because they'll see the saints as agents of, the cabal. They'll see them as people who have allowed for the cabal to reign, and that, that are ultimately defending the cabal. If that makes sense. So is this
going to be done in a way like that narrative right now where everyone's like, the Jews are bad and Jesus was a Jew, so you're just falling for more Jewery, right? Is that the angle where it's like, look, they're championing a Jew, and we just got finished telling you that the Jews are bad. We've even exposed to you that the Jews are bad.
Yes, and that's a big part of the deception too. Is the idea that Christianity is that Christianity itself is part of the global Jewish plan for domination and depopulation or whatever.
So if you can demonize the Jews, you could effectively do the same thing to Christianity.
Yes, and not even just that. Not even you can demonize Jesus, but you can also shift Jesus, change who Jesus is fundamentally into something that he never was.
Why are we bending over backwards to say that we are related to these people at all. We are not. This is the point that I'm making here from the very beginning. This is not the same thing. They are not our brothers. There's no such thing as Judeo-Christianity. Christian Zionism is an oxymoron.
I
They
have
have
a
almost
great
nothing to
seems
idea.
do with
like
each
I
other.
have a really good idea.
It
Have you
almost
ever-
seems
have
like
you
we'd
ever-
be good getting rid of the terminology Jew and just focusing on Christ.
I have a really good idea. Let's open up our Bibles. That's the solution for everything, in my opinion, is open up our Bibles, because that's where the truth is. It's not on these online forums. Okay, let's open up to Romans chapter 9. We're gonna go through Romans 9 through 11, and I'm going to show you how the Bible spells out how what the Jews are used for and how it culminates in the end times. Okay, let's start at Romans 9. Okay, so a lot of people really miss the nuance of God's plan for both Jews and Gentiles, right? Okay, so Romans 9, right? Paul, in the beginning of Romans 9, Paul is expressing how heartbroken he is that many of his fellow Jews haven't accepted Jesus as the Messiah. That's verses 1 through 5. Okay, he reassures them, or he reassures us that God's promises haven't failed, right? He's sovereign, remember? So instead of failing, God's plan has always been about his sovereign choices, just like Isaac and Ishmael and Jacob and Esau. That's what verses 6 through 13 are about. And then verses 14 through 18, it talks about how these choices are all part of God's bigger plan, and that he has a right to show mercy or harden hearts as he sees fit, right? So in passages 27 to 29, Paul is pointing out how there's always been a remnant of Jews who are faithful, which shows that God's ongoing commitment, shows us God's ongoing commitment to his promises, right? And then in Romans 10, Paul talks about how Jewish people are zealous for God, but they're missing the point about his righteousness that comes through Christ. That's passages 1 through 4. And then in passages 5 through 13, he contrasts the righteousness that comes from the law with the righteousness that comes from faith in Jesus, which is available to everybody who believes. Okay, then verses 14 to 7 through 17 is God is stressing the importance of preaching the gospel so that both Jews and Gentiles can hear and be saved. And then verses 18 through 21 talk about how, even though that the Jews may have rejected the gospel, Paul's explaining how this was something the prophets foresaw. This wasn't a failure in God's plan. The prophets foresaw this, and they are still accountable for those choices. They're still accountable. And then going to chapter 11, where this all culminates. This is Romans 11 is the culmination of chapter 11 is the culmination of chapters 9 and 10. So in Romans 11, Paul makes it clear that God hasn't abandoned his people. He says that he himself is a Jew who believes in Jesus, and he's showing us that there's always a remnant chosen by grace. That's verses 1 through 6, right? And then in verses 7 through 15, Paul's explaining how the partial hardening of Israel has allowed the Gentiles to come to faith, and that this inclusion of Gentiles is actually meant to make Israel want to come back to God, right? And then verses 17 through 24, Paul is using the example of an olive tree. Now, this is where we get into, we have nothing to do with the Jews. Well, let's talk about this. Paul uses the example of an olive tree. And some natural branches, which are the Jews, were what? They were broken off due to unbelief. And wild branches, Gentiles, were grafted in. But those natural branches can be grafted back if they return to faith, right? And then Paul cautions Gentile Christians not to boast over the Jews, right? He reminds Christians that they do not support the root, but the root supports them. And if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare the wild ones either if they do not continue in faith. So Paul reveals kind of a mystery here in verses 25 through 29. He says, after the full number of Gentiles comes in, all Israel will be saved based on God's promises in Isaiah, right? And it's a reference to Isaiah 59. So Paul is wrapping up this beautiful doxology praising God's wisdom and knowledge. Do you see how he's showing us how God is sovereign over these things, right? Now, if Paul was a truther, what would he be saying? He'd be saying the Jews, the Jews are behind every conspiracy. No, he's not pointing to what he's showing us that the Jews are blinded, but he's showing us that it's God's sovereignty that blinded. He's showing us that yes, they are enemies for the sake of the gospel, but they are beloved for the sake of their forefathers and the patriarchs, and that God has a plan to preserve a remnant in the last days. And this is exactly what Jacob's trouble is all about. This is exactly what the tribulation is all about. This is what Revelation is about, the revealing of the Messiah. That's what this whole thing is about. It's all about getting the remnant of Jews to repent and recognize Christ in preparation for Christ's return to reign from Jerusalem and establish establish the kingdom of Israel. That's the whole point of Revelation. And people point to all sorts of things, but they just miss the bigger picture here. They miss God's sovereign choices, God's sovereign election. Again, corporate election, corporate, right?
I almost recognize that there's like a fundamental divergence. So the divergence is like, if you come to this conclusion and you say God is sovereign and he's in control of everything and uses, men and even, these spirits to get his ultimate goal and to see this thing through the end. That's kind of having faith in God's plan and recognizing that even the terrible things that happen are all part of this process. And then the other side of it is if you see that, but then you decide that he is the engineer of our pain and suffering and has entrapped us in this. And that's kind of like what gives birth to like the sort of the demiurge or whatever the hell it is. It's this idea that God the Father is actually this great big villain.
And that's the only two sides. Yes, right. That's the only two sides. And here's the thing. A lot of Christians are unknowingly locking arms with the other side, believing they're liberating the planet from evil. That's the whole thing. And to what you were saying, yes, it's acknowledging that, but it's also how that plays into action because your thoughts lead to action, right? And so the question becomes, will you be a vessel of grace and mercy, or will you be a vessel of wrath and an instrument of judgment? That's the only two options that there will be in the last days. There's no other option. And if you're locking arms with the Gnostic New Age truthers in their battle against Babylon, then you're fighting their fight. You're fighting on the wrong side of a war that you don't understand. And I didn't understand it for so long because I've been a truther for most of my life. I started off at 15 years old watching 9/11 conspiracy videos. And ironically, the first one I watched was Zeitgeist. And what's interesting about Zeitgeist is, what are the three main things they talk about? They talk about the 9/11. They talk about the global currency reserve. And then they talk about Christianity. They talk about the Bible and how the Bible is the blueprint or the script for how the elites are controlling us. And that's the red pill rabbit hole. You're following the white rabbit, just like in the Matrix, right? If you're in these if you are following these truthers, if your worldview is aligned with the truthers, you are Neo. You are Neo following the white rabbit, seeing how deep this thing goes. And when you get to the bottom, you're not going to find Christ at the bottom of the rabbit hole, right? There's no light down there. You're all the way at the bottom. And people believe that they're aligning with Christ by joining up with the New Age truthers. But what they're really doing is they're actually following a counterfeit version, right? That opposes Yahweh. And a lot of people don't realize it yet, but that's what I'm saying. This is an unfolding deception. This is something
right, because in so many ways, it's like the question that I find myself asking is it a delusion to say that these various spiritual powers are running things and these people are running things when I know that God is sovereign and has a plan and I can see his handiwork in all of this? And so
here's what I would say. Let's take an example in Second Kings, right? When what is when King Ahab tries to take matters into his own hands and fight it through his own strength. What does God do? He sends a lying spirit into the mouths of King Ahab's prophets to pump up his delusion, to fluff his delusion up, to make him more hardened in what he already believes. Why? As a judgment against him. These lying spirits channeled by Alice Bailey, who sent them? The Lord did. Why? Because he is sovereign over the spiritual realm, and it's ultimately fulfilling his purposes.
Do these spirits still hate the Lord?
They, of course, yeah. Oh, yeah. They hate the Lord, but they're subservient to him. They are powerless, against the Lord, right? The Lord is totally sovereign over the spiritual realm. He's sovereign over Satan. Satan can't do anything without God say so, right? So these lying spirits in the mouths of all the New Age truther prophets, what we're witnessing is a judgment against them, and through their judgment, they're going to go ahead and judge the harlot. They're going to go ahead and judge the tribes of Israel and Judah, and God is going to use them to do that, and then he's going to judge them. Do you see what I'm saying? Again, going back to what I was saying, this is all part of God's plan to accomplish his purposes. But this is what I'm saying. No truther is saying this. None. They're all talking about the Illuminati. They're all talking about the Jews. They're all talking about man-made plans, man-made plots, man-made agendas that are absolutely powerless to God's sovereign plan. And that's what I'm trying to say. And you can become a vessel of grace and mercy. You can become a vessel of grace.
That because it's such a weird thing. It's like talking about the nature of God, right? So that scripture right there that we're talking about, it doesn't undermine his sovereignty or that his lineal plan of exactly what he's going to do, but he consults the entities around him. And these are not demons. These are angels. These are his angels, but they have certain jobs. And he says, what are we going to do about this guy? And he's like, I'll lie to him. And God says, go ahead and lie. So it's like God's asking and he's receiving advice from his counsel. So
right. But at the same time, we have to remember too that God has an overarching plan, right? The events that are happening.
How do you get there, Donnie? And how do you know that your way is the exact right way? I agree with you.
I just showed you Romans. Okay, let's go back to Romans.
But I don't want to read that again. I get it. We're getting stuck on like this truth or stuff, and I get it. And I also think that you missed the mark with what the delusion will be. I don't think it's going to be that. I don't think it's going to be exactly what you're saying. That'll be part of it.
What do you think the deception is, and how does it how does it fit into God's overarching plan?
The deception, the falling away from religion. I think that we're seeing it in a more technological way. I don't think it has anything to do with the Jews. I think it has to do with probably more of what Trump and Elon Musk are doing right now. But that's like a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother bag of worms.
How do you think God is using that to accomplish his purposes?
He's allowing it.
Why?
Because this is the way things are going to go. If this is the plan, if this is the final iteration,
how does that judge the harlot?
What do you mean?
Okay, well, we know that the beast deception is the strong delusion, right? We know that the beast judges the harlot. So how does your view of the deception judge the harlot?
Christian nationalism.
So who's the harlot in that scenario?
Well, I'm saying that Christian nationalism would galvanize to, like, let's say the Trump administration or the beast system, and the harlot. I wouldn't know exactly what individual to identify it with, but it's like generations of sexual immorality and sort of just all of the corrosive behavior that culminated in like Drag Queen Story Hour and all that other shit. To me, that's representative of like this one system that we've been under, and it's been growing exponentially, and now all of a sudden we're experiencing this pendulum swing in the opposite direction. And I expect that new system will bear just as much extremism, probably more, because I think when it swings back, it's going to go a little bit further than the original position, but it's going to be of a different variety. And that different variety is going to be like, conservatism, and it's going to be a good place for people who think that Christian nationalism is a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when we talk about the harlot, right, we have to get into the specifics, and this is and not against you or anything, but I see a lot of people that are kind of just like, it's like, oh, it's this vague spiritualized thing, and it's like, I think we need to get really down. We need to really get down to specifics to understand Bible prophecy, because if we're not getting the specifics, then we don't really know what's going on, right? So if we interpret the Bible with the Bible, as I believe we should, you will see that the harlot of Babylon is apostate Jerusalem, right? So, like, if you look at Revelation chapter 11, verse 8, which speaks of the death of the two witnesses, right? It says, and I quote, and their dead bodies shall lie in the streets of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So obviously that great city is also where our Lord was crucified. Now keep that phrase in mind, the great city. Revelation chapter 14, verse 8. And there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen.
Why is the great city? Why is the great city where Jesus was crucified?
Because Revelation chapter 11, verse 8 says, and their dead bodies shall lie in the streets of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So keep in mind that phrase, the great city. When we look at Revelation chapter 14, verse 8, it says, and there followed another angel in heaven, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. If we read in Revelation chapter 17, verse 18, it says, and the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So we can see when it's speaking about Babylon or the harlot, the same phrase, that the great city, is also used. In chapter 11, the great city is identified as Jerusalem, and the great city is also used in chapters 14 and 17 when speaking about Babylon, right? So if we let the Bible interpret itself, we can't come to any other conclusion than that the harlot of Babylon is apostate Jerusalem, which also makes sense because Jerusalem is the only city that God would call a harlot, because it's the only city that God ever made a holy covenant with. And it's the only city that he tried to make his bride. And you see, the whole marital analogy is used throughout scripture, both with Jerusalem and Israel, as well as with the general body of believers who become part of Israel spiritually. And the body of believers, both Jew and Gentile, make up God's bride. And so there's really no other reason for God to call a city a harlot unless the city or the people of it betrayed a holy covenant with God. Again, only one nation that made a covenant with, and which is Jerusalem and the nation of Israel, right? Harlotry is not a reference to mere wicked acts. It's specifically a reference to betrayal. And I think it's pretty clear that Jerusalem is that great city, the unfaithful wife who had continually betrayed her marriage with God. And of course, Jerusalem and Israel are referred to a harlot in Isaiah 1, Jeremiah 2, chapter 3, Ezekiel 16, Galatians 4. It's the only city in the Bible that's called a harlot. And that's what brought the day of the Lord, was their harlotry, right? God delivered Israel into the hands of her enemies because she played the harlot. And so too will it be at the end when the great day of the Lord comes in the final days and the Lord God delivers Jerusalem into the hands of her enemies. And then the icing on the cake is Luke 13 says, Jesus himself says a prophet cannot perish outside of Jerusalem. And then if you look at Revelation chapter 18, verse 24, it says, and in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and of all the people that were slain upon the earth. So there are unresolvable contradictions in the text without understanding that apostate Jerusalem, God's bride who played the harlot, is mystery Babylon that is judged by the beast and the nations in preparation for their discipline and repentance and their acceptance of the true Messiah when he comes to establish his kingdom. That's the whole point.
I think that we're going to have to put a pin in it here. Unfortunately, we have a meeting that we have to go to, but I'm really happy that we spent as much time talking about this as
About
we
the
did.
Jews again. It's just
Well, no, I know we end up talking about the
So
Jews a lot,
tired.
but it's like
Jews.
it's an important topic because just to keep going back to it, it's like this is gripping the overarching conversation on X, and I do maintain that it's going to spill out into the real world, it has already in so
mhm.
many different ways. And so
Yep.
I look at where I think this is going, and I think it's very important to at least talk about this.
Mm,
And I'm not saying that we have the answers, or Donnie, that you have the
mm,
answers. But
mhm,
I think that through extended conversation, we can come to something pretty close to it.
mhm,
And maybe you're right, Donnie. This is something that I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch. I don't typically rewatch a lot of our episodes, but
mhm,
um, there's a steep learning curve to this conversation, and
mhm,
you guys engage in it in a way that's very fluid. It's familiar to you. This is not as familiar to me, and so I think that a lot of the audience probably resonates to my point of view, which is like we're just gripped and trying to make heads or
yeah.
tails of this.
Well, I think it's like there was a little bit of like talking past each other where I'm creating a straw man of what Donnie's saying. He's doing the same to me. I
Yeah,
think
I feel as though
we
you guys
both
agreed on a
we
multitude of things.
recognize
Yeah.
we're recognizing this issue that it's like, yeah, no, all arms,
Mhm,
all hands on deck against Israel. That's where we're headed at right now, or at least the
mhm,
Jews,
mhm,
whatever that is.
mhm,
Yeah.
I'm sitting here, I'm asking important questions like,
mhm.
can we differentiate? What are these things? What is a Jew? Who are these people? And also,
Who
like
Look at
are
as
look at
you
we
this.
people?
who are these
Not
people?
nice boy says
As we move
2,000
forward,
years later, right?
yeah,
Mhm,
2000
2,000
mhm,
years
years later, and
later,
we're still
what the
doing this.
hell?
mhm,
But as
mhm,
we move forward in this thing, there's so much nuance and conversation to be had. And also it's like
mhm,
I feel like if we're going to be like kept on track and you don't want this new age message, because I agree with you, that's being
mhm,
proliferated. We just did an
mhm,
episode about the telepathy tapes where I think that you should look into that, but that's going to
mm,
be a huge arm of how this is proliferated.
mm,
The conversation needs to be had, what they are, what is going on, and what can we do to avoid the traps of the past, but not just avoid them, because
mhm.
I don't think like inaction is avoidance. I think that
I
there has to
agree.
be something done. And he says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. So
Mm,
we need to understand this stuff. So part of what you're bringing to the table, I think, is correct. I think what I'm saying, part of it needs to be considered as well. And there's an answer here forward, moving forward, that can have a satisfactory outcome. I believe. I don't think that this has to be the end. I think that we've been here many times before. I think maybe 109 times we've been here where people have had this question running around. So, can we pray for our president? Can we pray for this country that it kind of
Mhm.
turns around and we don't have to do this right now? I think so. I don't think God is completely
Well, I'm
set.
excited. I'm excited for Christ's kingdom. I don't know about you, but man,
oh
like,
yeah.
Yeah, I'm
know,
not excited for the stuff that precedes it.
I'm
Well,
It has
I'm
to
excited.
be.
not
I'm
excited for.
excited for it. I'm excited for it. And I'll tell you why I'm excited for it. Because in the same way that the early Christians were joyous to receive to be seen worthy as martyrs for
Mm,
Christ. I would be beyond grateful to be called worthy of a martyr of Christ. Right?
yeah.
Like I'm excited. I like and that's the
No,
thing
I
is it sounds
agree.
crazy. Yeah.
You know what I'm not excited about though, Donnie, is the people who would be deceived. That's what I'm not
Yes.
excited about.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
so at
Yes.
the end
Yes.
of the day, what I care most about is the truth. And I'm not
I
saying that
agree.
I have a handle on it, but
Mhm.
getting to it, and then
Yes.
being able to show other people how we
Mhm.
got there, and what
Mhm.
the truth is, that's the most important thing. And
Yeah,
so
agreed. And that's and
uh
that's and that's what I believe I'm trying to do right now is
yes.
showing people, hey, what's happening isn't an accident. It's not random. These are
No.
all a sequence of events that's leading up to Christ's
Yeah.
return and his
I
reign.
would happily be martyred for Jesus Christ and proclaim his name until my from my shoulders. But what about all the people who would be deceived?
Mhm.
That's the thing.
I'll be honest, and I know
Mhm.
Donnie will disagree with me, but I would prefer to raise my children in a place where the food's not poisoned and we don't have to deal with these weird
Mm,
economic
You
calamities for no
will.
reason
You
in
will.
the world that God has given us. So,
That's well, the
yes,
world that's come. Well, that's the thing is like it all goes back again to like what we want. We want it now. We want peace and safety now, and that's the
mm,
whole thing. And I understand it comes from a genuine place. I get it. But it's the same thing that Israel fell into. They wanted peace, safety, prosperity. They wanted it in their timing, but it wasn't yet time. When
right.
Christ returns and when he dashes the kingdoms of the world, that's when the appointed time. And those who had faith in that, and those who were vessels of grace and mercy and not vessels of wrath, they will be raised up in glorified, incorruptible bodies and reign with Christ over the nations, be given authority over the nations. Why would
Mm,
God give authority to people who preemptively tried to take on a role that was not for that time? right? He's not. Those are the people that are being purged. All the people who are trying to bring the kingdom to heaven on earth right now through, uniting the world, defeating the cabal and all that. These are all people that are going to be judged, right? The people who are patient. That's why it says, here are the patience of the saints. It's all about patience. It's all about humility, waiting for God's timing, trusting in his plan, carrying out his commands. And that's what the truthers will never tell you. That's my
I
whole
think
thing.
that if you care about vengeance, you'll stop at the Jews. If you care about the truth, you'll realize it goes beyond them.
Much
and
further beyond that.
That's where a lot of people are stopping. But listen, we do have to wrap it up. Donnie, thank you for your time, and thank you for this discussion. I think
I'm sorry I yelled at you, Donnie.
No, I'm sorry. No.
You.
Okay, so like I have like severe ADHD, so like sometimes I'll start yelling. I'm so sorry. That's like my.
No, don't worry about it, man.
It's okay. I'm from Puerto Rican. I'm from a Puerto Rican family, so it's like all yelling constantly.
I was born in Puerto Rico, so like
there you go. So yeah, it's just a couple of Browns yelling. It's fine. We're good.
We are. Yeah,
unbelievable. And I'm subjected to it. Unbelievable. All right, guys. One more time, Donnie, for the people, where can they find you?
X at Donnie Darkened. Go through my highlights. Just go to my highlights and just go through all my highlights, and everything will add up. And study the word, be in the word, walk in the spirit, and you'll be good. That's really it.
All right, perfect. And Donnie, I encourage you to do. I think you should do that. Take your highlights, compile them, use the demons on Grok AI to maybe who knows, you might get something really cool out of it. Maybe even like a book or something that you could formulate to like put your arguments all together.
Yeah, I know, right? I'll try it out.
All right,
guys.
Okay, thank you.
Until next time, obey, submit, and comply, but not in the way that we were just saying. See you later, guys.
The greatest hypnotist on planet Earth is a oblong box in the corner of the room. It is constantly telling us what to believe is real.
You can persuade people that what they see with their eyes is what there is to see. You can't. Because they'll laugh in the face of an explanation that portrays the bigger picture.